1957, Ankara, a secret meeting that almost nobody knows about. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion flies into Turkey, quietly, no press, no cameras, no announcement. He sits down with Turkish Prime Minister Adnan Menderes, and what's on the table? Intelligence sharing, military cooperation, a joint plan against the Soviets. This meeting was so classified that even CIA internal reports only mention it in a few lines. Now here's why I'm telling you this. Most coverage of Turkey and Israel goes like this. They used to be allies. Erdogan got angry. Mavi Marmara happened. Now they hate each other. The end. That version is not wrong, but it is incomplete. An incomplete analysis is just another way of being wrong. Because the real story of Turkey and Israel is not a love story that turned into a breakup. It is something far more interesting. It is the story of two states that need each other, argue with each other, and cannot fully walk away from each other, no matter what their leaders say in public. In this video, I want to show you three things. First, this relationship never fully broke, and I have satellite imagery to prove it. Second, Turkey and Israel are now competing across 4 continents simultaneously. And third, the real battlefield between them has nothing to do with Gaza. It is about energy corridors, sea routes, and who controls the next map of the Middle East. Let's start at the beginning. Turkey was the first Muslim-majority country to recognize the state of Israel. The year was 1949. The Arab-Israeli war had just ended. And while Arab states were cutting ties, Ankara sent an ambassador to Tel Aviv. This was not idealism. This was cold, strategic calculation. Turkey at that time had 2 serious problems: Soviet pressure from the north and the fear of regional isolation. Israel had the same fears, surrounded by hostile Arab states desperately searching for reliable partners. 2 countries, 2 anxieties, 1 handshake. And that handshake went deep. According to CIA documents from the late 1950s, Mossad, Turkish intelligence MIT, and Iran's Savak formed a trilateral secret agreement. Mossad would monitor Soviet activities in Turkey and the region. In return, Israel would provide counterintelligence training and advisory support directly to MIT. Think about what that means. Israel was training Turkey's intelligence apparatus in the same country where decades later MIT would be dismantling Mossad networks on Turkish soil. That is not contradiction. That is history. The military cooperation went even further. Israeli technicians modernized Turkish fighter jets. The Israeli Air Force conducted joint exercises in Turkish airspace. Agreements covered air, naval, land, and intelligence cooperation simultaneously. By the late 1990s, a New York Times analysis described this partnership as having the potential to reshape Middle Eastern politics entirely. So when did this start to crack? 2008, Davos. Erdogan confronts Israeli President Peres on live television and walks off the stage. The world is shocked, but behind the scenes, the relationship continues. 2010, the Mavi Marmara incident. Israeli commandos board a Turkish vessel in international waters. 10 Turkish citizens are killed. Ambassadors are recalled. But trade continues. This is the pattern you need to understand. Public confrontation, private continuity. And nowhere is this more visible than in what happened after October 7th. In May 2024, Turkey made a major announcement. All exports, imports, and transit trade with Israel suspended completely. The headlines were strong, the message was clear, or so it seemed. Because then, the satellite images arrived. Independent researchers tracked 57 oil tankers that departed from Turkey's Ceyhan port and never reached their declared destinations. According to the satellite data, those ships docked at Israel's Ashkelon port. Additionally, vessels carrying Turkish names, registered under Panama and Liberian flags, were making continuous runs to Israeli ports. Now, I want to be precise here. This is not unique to Turkey. This is how every major power operates under geopolitical pressure. The United States maintained backdoor energy deals during the Cold War, while publicly condemning Soviet partners. European nations continued Russian gas imports for years, while officially sanctioning Moscow. The gap between official policy and economic reality is not hypocrisy. It is the grammar of statecraft. Turkey is navigating an extraordinarily difficult position. Its domestic base demands solidarity with Gaza. Its economy depends on trade relationships built over decades. Its strategic position in NATO requires careful balance. Managing all three simultaneously is not weakness. It is arguably the most sophisticated foreign policy balancing act in the region. And while this tension plays out publicly, something far more significant is happening on the ground, across 4 different theaters. Turkey and Israel are engaged in a quiet, sustained, and deeply consequential competition. Let's go through them one by one. Somalia. This one surprises most people. Since 2017, Turkey has operated Turksom, its largest overseas military base in the world, in Mogadishu. Over 16,000 Somali soldiers have been trained there. Turkey has built hospitals, schools, roads, and the main runway of Mogadishu's international airport. This is not charity. This is strategic architecture, a model that combines security, development, and diplomacy into a single coherent presence, something very few countries in the world have managed to do on this continent. In February 2026, Turkey significantly escalated its commitment. 3 F-16 Viper fighter jets, T-129 ATAC helicopters, and naval assets were deployed to Mogadishu. Turkish and Somali special forces conducted joint ground operations against al-Shabaab. Turkey is now actively protecting Somali airspace, and Somalia's media has taken notice, describing Turkish forces as operating with a night vision and drone capability that their adversaries simply cannot counter. Why does all of this matter? Because Somalia sits at the entrance of the Red Sea. It controls the junction between Europe, Asia, and the Gulf. Whoever has a credible presence there has leverage over one of the most critical maritime corridors on the planet. Turkey understood this before most Western capitals were paying attention. And then, Israel made its move. On December 26, 2025, Israel became the first country in the world to recognize Somaliland, a breakaway region in northern Somalia, as an independent state. The decision was made unilaterally, without Somali consent, and was immediately condemned by Turkey, the Arab League, the African Union, and 10 nations in a joint statement signed just days ago. Why did Israel do this? The strategic logic is clear. Somaliland's northern coastline sits directly across from Yemen. Recognizing Somaliland gives Israel potential access to the Berbera port, a position from which it can monitor Houthi movements and project influence into a sea lane that has become existential to its security. Some analysts have also pointed to Somaliland's underdeveloped mineral resources as a longer-term factor. This is Israel's old peripheral doctrine, applied to a new geography. Turkey's response came within weeks, F-16s to Mogadishu, a statement of support for Somali territorial integrity, a clear, unambiguous signal. The Horn of Africa is now a live front in the Turkey-Israel competition. Libya, 2019. This is where Turkey demonstrated something that permanently changed modern military thinking. The UN-recognized government in Tripoli was losing ground fast. General Khalifa Haftar's Eastern forces, backed by the UAE, Egypt, and Russian mercenaries, were advancing on the capital. Libya was about to fall to a coalition that would have locked Turkey out of North African influence entirely. Turkey intervened. It deployed Bayraktar TB2 drones, naval assets, and military advisors, and within months, the offensive collapsed. The TB2s destroyed armored columns, air defense systems, and supply lines with a precision and cost ratio that Western military analysts had not anticipated. Haftar's forces, despite Russian air defense equipment and mercenary support, had no effective answer. This was not just a Libyan outcome. This was a global demonstration that a mid-sized power with the right technology and the right partnerships could shift the outcome of a conflict without deploying a large conventional force. Turkey proved something in Libya that is still being studied in military academies across the world. But here is the part that connects directly to the Turkey-Israel competition. Simultaneously, Turkey negotiated a maritime boundary agreement with the Tripoli government. That agreement drew a line in the eastern Mediterranean that effectively blocked the proposed route of the East Med pipeline, a project Israel, Greece, and Cyprus had been developing for years to bring Israeli natural gas directly to European markets, completely bypassing Turkish territory. With one move in Libya, Turkey achieved a military victory, demonstrated a new form of power projection, and neutralized a major Israeli strategic energy initiative. The EastMed pipeline has been stalled ever since. That is not luck, that is strategy. Azerbaijan, Turkey's most precise strategic achievement of the past decade. In 2020, the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War began. In 44 days, Azerbaijan recovered territories it had lost 30 years earlier. And at the center of that victory was the Bayraktar TB2. Turkish drones gave Azerbaijan an asymmetric edge that ended the conflict before international pressure could intervene. Armenia's conventional defenses, built around Soviet-era systems, had no answer for what they were facing. Turkey achieved this without committing ground troops to direct combat, without triggering a NATO crisis, without drawing international sanctions. Clean, effective, and strategically sound. Now consider the deeper geometry. The losing side was Armenia. Armenia's primary external backer was Iran, and Iran's most significant regional adversary is Israel. Turkey, by supporting Azerbaijan, simultaneously strengthened its closest strategic partner, weakened an Iranian proxy, and showcased a military capability that no regional power, including Israel, could afford to ignore. Turkey never framed it this way publicly. It didn't need to. The results spoke clearly enough. And then there is Syria, the theater that may determine everything else. When Assad's regime fell, Turkey was already positioned. Its relationships with the new Syrian leadership were established. Its military footprint in the north was intact, and its strategic vision, Syria as an energy corridor, a reconstruction opportunity, and a buffer, was ready to execute. Israel's response has been to expand its buffer zones in southern Syria, strike military infrastructure repeatedly, and push for a decentralized Syrian state that cannot project power toward its borders. The two visions are fundamentally incompatible. Turkey wants a stable, unified Syria aligned with Ankara. Israel wants a fragmented Syria that poses no coherent threat. AME post-war territory, completely opposing blueprints. Now let's step back and look at the full picture. The Horn of Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, Libya, Azerbaijan, Syria. These are not five separate stories. They are five fronts of the same underlying competition, over energy corridors, over sea routes, over who sits at the center of the next 30 years of regional architecture. Turkey's vision is a corridor running from the Gulf through Syria, Jordan, and Iraq into Turkish territory and out to Europe. The new Syrian government has publicly endorsed this direction. Ahmed al-Shara outlined it explicitly at a meeting in Antalya just days ago. Israel's vision runs differently, through the Mediterranean, through normalized Gulf partners, through Somaliland's coastline, bypassing Turkish influence at every point. In Azerbaijan, paradoxically, both countries are present simultaneously. Turkey moves gas through Tanap. Israel receives 40% of its oil from Azerbaijani fields. The same pipelines serve competing strategies. This is the real war between Turkey and Israel. No declarations, no front lines, just ports, pipelines, and positioning. Erdogan can speak about solidarity with the Muslim world. Netanyahu can speak about Israeli security. But the question underneath every decision both of them make is always the same. Who controls the route? Who owns the infrastructure? Who collects the toll when the energy moves? That war has no easy ending. And that brings me to the question I want to leave you with. Syria now has a new government, and both Turkey and Israel are actively competing for its alignment. Turkey is offering reconstruction finance, political frameworks, and the promise of regional integration. Israel is offering security arrangements and the implicit warning of military consequences if its red lines are crossed. Which approach do you think Syria's new leadership will ultimately choose? And what does that answer tell us about who actually writes the next chapter of this region? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of analysis you come here for, you know what to do.